Hello everyone and welcome back to Project Next. I'm Finn Blake and I'm bringing to light success stories to empower the next generation. Today's episode 7 and I'm talking to Tim Fung, the CEO and founder of Airtasker, one of Australia's most recognisable tech startups. In this episode, Tim reveals the backstory to discovering the idea for Airtasker, which came about following a couple of years in investment banking at Macquarie. Tim also gives some incredible insight into the struggles that he experienced as a founder of a startup. Although it hasn't necessarily been a smooth ride for Tim, his story definitely demonstrates the need for persistence in your own career. Airtasker has now listed on the ASX and is looking to dominate markets overseas. If you're looking to explore a career in tech, startups, or business, then you need to hear Tim's story. As always, if you've been here before, you know where the like button is, and if you're new, make yourself familiar with the subscribe button below. Before we get into it, I'm super excited to announce that we're partnering with Hyper for this episode. Hyper is a global startup incubator that provides you with the safest way to launch your startup. At Hyper, they believe that every idea should have the best possible chance for success, guiding founders to validate, build, and grow their technology businesses from ideation to investment. Like Project Next, Hyper is super focused on the next generation. You'll find everything you need right below in the description. I know we're all excited for this one, so let's get straight into it. So Tim Fung, the founder of Airtasker, the Australian marketplace for outsourcing everyday tasks. The company is now valued at $400 million after floating on the ASX. I can't wait to hear the backstory of this idea, Tim, because it is an awesome one. So thank you so much for joining me on Project Next.
Thanks for having me, Finn.
So Tim, I'd love to take a bit of a deep dive into your childhood and what your motivations were growing up. Did you always want to sort of work in startups, and did you always envision starting your own business?
Yeah, I actually don't think I had too much of a plan when I was growing up. I was always sort of interested in solving problems and trying things in a different way. And I think that in general, I didn't really like to accept things just for the way that they were. But I don't think I ever kind of envisioned starting a company or anything like that. It was more just like doing stuff. And so, I had a pretty regular sort of education, went to uni and did a commerce degree. So that was sort of good sort of, generalist kind of a degree and approach. And then via a bunch of serendipitous things led to starting a startup.
Awesome. Yeah, so I was actually going to touch on your experience at uni. So you get stuck in your commerce degree at UNSW, and so tell me about what you were thinking at that stage in terms of what you saw yourself doing long term.
So actually, I think it's a great sort of observation because when I was transitioning into uni, I sort of had the book in front of me of all the different courses that you could do, and actually my initial choice was actually going to be industrial design because I thought that be interesting to get across how things are built and have the opportunity to make products and things like that. And I guess my parents kind of said, looking at the number of jobs that you can get in industrial design in Australia, that looks like it's really hard. So maybe consider something more general. And so that's why I ended up into commerce. But I don't think there was any planning or anything broader than that at that stage.
Yeah. And so what was the decision, why did you end up making the decision to go into commerce ultimately instead of industrial design? I know you mentioned that there was a little bit of a push from your parents, but do you ever think, what if?
No, I tend to think that, I probably would have ended up back in the same spot no matter what, because I don't think my commerce degree really necessarily, led me directly to where I am. I think uni was just like another great sort of life experience. But yeah, actually the reason why I ended up in commerce is because there was a degree that they had at the time called tourism and hospitality management and marketing. And so I actually, that sounded really appealing to me because I was like, oh, tourism, that's like going on holidays and vacations and, sort of sucked into that glamour. So that's sort of like why I went in that direction. thankfully, the degree that we had was the degree that I ended up pursuing was also a generalist marketing degree as well, and so that was valuable.
So, in terms of people that are going that are finishing up high school at the moment and deciding what they want to do in their university degrees and are probably having a little bit of trouble in making that decision, would the advice be to just go with the gut because you're going to end up where you will be anyway, like in your situation?
I think that it does depend on like what kind of career that you're moving forward to. In Australia, I think there is quite a lot of dependency between like university degree and what jobs are open to you. For example, I think if you do want to go into something like law or investment banking or one of these kind of quite specialist things, and I do think it starts pretty early on, like going down that path if you want to be successful, which I don't necessarily think is a great thing, actually. I think it's really tough to make that kind of decision when you're 17 or 18, but I do think that that's how it still kind of rolls in Australia, and which is kind of different to the US, where I think you do more generalist degrees.
Mm-hmm.
That said, if you're thinking about doing something like, wanting to start a company or, be involved in business in general, then I think it doesn't really matter so much because you don't really have like these institutions like, Goldman Sachs or Mallison's lawyers or something, which are deciding, what the requirements are. And in that sense, from a very generalist sense, I think that there's not too much pressure. I studied tourism and hospitality in university, and I'm doing something completely different now.
Yep, gotcha. And so, Tim, going back to your story specifically, is there anything you wish you had have done a little bit differently while you were at uni? And if you could tell the university student Tim one thing, what would it be?
It's a great thought. I think if I look at it from the perspective of like starting a company and business and things like that, I would definitely say that uni would be a great time to do that in terms of the capacity that you have, and I guess usually the sort of lack of commitments and stuff that you have, in life in terms of whether it's family or mortgages or things like that. So I think from that sense, it's a really great opportunity. And when I reflect back on it, I was at uni for 4 years, and I had I could have started a company then. That would have been a great opportunity. Coming at from another perspective, like a life perspective, once you start a company, it's often like all on. And like for me at Airtasker, it has been, almost a 10-year journey, and it's felt like being, running a marathon for 10 years almost. So that's been pretty intense. And so I think that you've got to be pretty passionate and find it really, really something that you want to do before you go and commit yourself to that kind of thing. And for me, Airtasker, the opportunity is so enormous that I'm thrilled. I'm passionate about getting up every day to try and solve this problem of like creating jobs and income for people, and it's an interesting problem to be solving. But I do kind of like reflect on some of these entrepreneurs who start out when they're 17 or 18, and have they had that opportunity to just chill and experience life before a company?
Yep, gotcha. Now, before you did actually jump into Airtasker, you had a bit of a stint at Macquarie. You cut your teeth at Macquarie as an analyst, and so I'd love to hear about you. You touched on the institutions and Goldman Sachs and those types of places. What did you actually get out of this experience that held you in good stead for being an entrepreneur?
So first of all, I think that if I kind of like reflect on my experience from a career trajectory perspective, I pretty much like started in the big company environment, and then sort of like worked my way down to smaller and smaller companies. And when I reflect on what I learned at Macquarie, it was really they had a really high performance culture. And I probably took it for granted a little bit when I was an analyst there. You kind of just assume, you've got this great office, you've got like manager training, you've got people who understand the strategy and the vision of the company that's getting communicated really clearly. People don't make mistakes on basic stuff, like how to set up meetings, how to send emails, all of that IT infrastructure, all of this stuff you kind of just take for granted as an analyst. But actually, when you go and work in a startup, you start realizing, like, holy crap, someone had to like design and implement all of that with incredible intention. And so now when I look back on my days at Macquarie, I think it was incredible training ground to learn from people who really ambitious, really high performance, and also learn about like how you create and infuse a culture into those people to keep them all driving in the right direction. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was a great experience, and I'd really encourage people. Obviously, if you have an idea and you're super passionate about it, for sure, go chase it. But if that's not the case, I would actually think that it's a great opportunity to cut your teeth in places where people have sort of been on the journey and figured a few things out before you go and try and do it yourself.
Yep. Tim, I was actually going to ask you, what would the advice be to, young uni students that are about to finish and they're kind of grappling with the decision as to whether to jump into, the corporate environment or, even join an early stage startup? Do you think there's merits to both? And obviously you've done both. So having the benefit of hindsight, which one would you choose at this stage of our journeys?
I think that I would choose to go somewhere where I'm prioritizing learning outside of uni. And I don't necessarily think that doesn't necessarily mean, go work for a big company or a small company, but my like prioritization of like what I would go for would be a place where I can learn the kinds of skills that I want in the long term. And I think that early stage startups are often not a great place to do that. Early stage startups are often, founders are kind of like, this needs to happen tomorrow. And so it's often about either bringing in generalists who are just going to sort of hack things together. That's one archetype of what founders are looking for in that early stage environment. Or it's extremely experienced people who've done this before and are just going to roll it out. And with absolute respect, don't have time to train people or like coach or any of those things. It's like we're playing the A game now. It just needs to be A game like straight away. And I think that environment is not always conducive to being great for like grads and people who are looking to level up their experience.
And so, Tim, going back to your story again, you lasted almost 5 years at Macquarie, which is quite impressive given the workload and the hours and the work-life balance and everything. What was the moment that you realised that you needed to leave?
So actually, I was watching a lot of the show Entourage at the time, and I was kind of like, Ari Gold's got a really good job. Like that'd be really cool to do what he does. And I'm also like personally really interested in motorsports and in particular like Formula One. And so at the time I was actually like looking after this kid who was Mark Webber's third cousin from Queanbeyan and who was also like a national champion in go-karting. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to go and like learn about how this whole world kind of works. And so I actually made this like color brochure about myself. It's completely ostentatious. It's pretty disgraceful now, actually, when I think about it. Anyway, I made this brochure and I sent it out to probably about 10 or 15 talent agencies across Australia. And the only two people returned my call. One was like, no. The other one was like, all right, come in and we'll have a chat. And thankfully, that was actually like the biggest agency in Australia, Chic Management. Looks after a bunch of Victoria's Secret models, but also quite entrepreneurial in the sense that they've branched out from models to bloggers and chefs and celebrities and film production and stuff like that. So they just simply returned my email. I went in and I met those folks, and it was just something that was an opportunity that was really, really awesome. I actually didn't get paid. I offered to work for them for free. But I just kind of had this inkling that if you're working and surrounding yourself with like really top-notch people, whether they're creatives or technical or whatever that is, great opportunities are going to come from that, and that turned out to be the case.
And so 2012 rolls around and the idea for Airtasker becomes a bit of a reality. Tell me about the inspiration for the idea behind Airtasker.
Yeah, so I was moving apartments, and one of my friends has a truck that he uses to do deliveries for his small business. So he makes frozen chicken nuggets and chicken chippies and stuff. Delicious products, by the way. Herman's Dutch Croquettes is the name of the business.
Shout out to them.
Yeah, his name is not Herman, and he's not Dutch. So, I think it's just a branding thing that's a bit old now. But anyway,
nice.
Awesome products. But basically I asked him like, hey, you got this truck, come and help me move. And I think that's a really common, like a common thing that people will ask, oh, you got a drill, can you come and help me do this? You got a truck, can you help me move? So he came and helped me move all of my stuff, and that just got us thinking. It's like, isn't it strange that we do actually, like, I would ask you to help me move when you're totally busy with your job. You have, you've got lots of stuff to do, and I'm asking you on the weekend to come and help me move. Like, that's just like a strange sort of interaction. And so we kind of like were sitting around there thinking like, why does this happen? And what we've realized is just that there's such a high degree of friction to go and find someone to help you out with these things. And that's kind of crazy because if you think about like buying physical things like products, it's so seamless. You go to eBay or Amazon, just like, yeah, I need a fridge. Bang, I'm going to buy a fridge. I need a hat. I'm going to go buy a hat. But when it comes to like, I need someone to help me like move some boxes, it's like, oh my gosh, freak out. Like, this is going to be so hard. And then people start asking questions like, oh, is this person a stranger? Are they going to break all my things? Are they insured? How am I going to find them? This is just going to be so much trouble. And so that was really the genesis for Airtasker. But I would say that over time, our thinking did evolve. And actually, even though we started out with this kind of like thesis of like making e-commerce for local services simpler and easier, we actually realized that the impact that we were having on our service providers, on our taskers, was actually even more profound. And so we've actually anchored our business even more so now around job creation and the opportunity to create income for people, as well as just creating like an awesome experience for local services.
Yeah, of course. And so, Tim, I often, particularly after a couple of beers, will go and throw out a few business ideas to all my mates, and they'll tell me a million reasons as to why they're not feasible and why it won't work. Did it feel like one of these little ideas to you at the start? And what made you really think that it was going to work?
So first of all, I absolutely empathize with that sort of situation, and It is really interesting about how you you sort of overcome that kind of friction and confidence and conviction and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm that person as well. Have a glass of wine and then hey, I've got the best idea ever. Wouldn't this be awesome? There's probably like a whole bunch that sort of like you wake up the next morning, you're like, nah, it's a crap idea.
That's usually the case.
Yeah. Then there's a bunch where you talk to your friends and they just absolutely pan it, and that kind of sits in a separate bucket. And I'd say most of my ideas probably fall into that bucket. I must say that with Airtasker, when I did present it to people, one of my roommate at the time was working superannuation. Really incredibly smart and talented person, but very, very conservative about like making financial bets and stuff. And this was the first idea where he was like, that's actually pretty good. Like, that's actually something that has merit. And so that was a good little bit of signaling to move ahead. But I would say, like, you can expect with pretty much every idea, even after we'd launched Airtasker, there were people in like our family and friendship circle that were basically thinking like, this guy's bonkers. Like, that is never going to work, and it's bad. And some people were just thinking it. Other people just said it to me. But I think that this is the risk that you take as when you go and found a company. And sometimes you're going to have egg on your face and be wrong. But it takes risking that to actually go out and do something that might be interesting and might have a positive impact on society.
Yeah, for sure. And so who were the biggest people at that time that you really had to convince? And did you feel as though you had to convince them to have the confidence in yourself to be able to make the idea work? And I suppose that's a question more generally for founders as well, who are trying to, validate their idea.
Well, I think the number one person that you need to convince is yourself. And I think that is... It's probably not great to go out there and expect to get validation from others as a way of like gaining your own confidence. For me, with Airtasker, the reason why I think we were able to like start this company and push through some really, really hard times, especially at the beginning, was primarily because, like, to me, the value equation of Airtasker is really, really clear and simple and easy, which is basically like, There are definitely things that people need to get done that they cannot access someone who's got the skills to do that. And there are people out there with all of these skills that they just need to share. And we're like, that value equation, connecting those two, sides of a marketplace together seems like an absolute no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, what we always said to ourselves was, at least we know that someone's going to do this. It may not be us. There's risk in the fact that, maybe someone else will do this before we do it. But there's no doubt in our minds that one, we're adding value and having a positive impact on society and community if we can do this. And two, both the problem and the solution exist out there. And so that kind of just left you with that risk of like, yeah, can you do it? Are you the right people to go and do this? And to me, of course, you always have like a wavering levels of confidence as to whether that is you, but that's very different to that first problem that you need to get over, which is like, is what I am doing fundamentally value creating and good for society? And I think that's the really critical one that you've got to be able to answer, and that should come from you.
And so, Tim, you mentioned the difficult first 12 months or so, and you would have had plenty of hard times. But tell me about those difficult periods in the early stages when you were trying to pitch to investors and trying to sell this idea to get funding.
So I think for us, so maybe I can sort of just like reflect on the timeline. So
yeah.
Starting a marketplace is quite unique. If I had to kind of, one possible dimension you can look at like starting a company is like, what does the capital investment curve need to look like? And I think on one end, you've got things like services businesses or SaaS businesses even, which is mostly like not too much capital up front, and you're going to start generating revenue right away. And so actually you don't have to invest that much capital. So for example, if you're going to start like a graphic design firm or an accounting firm, you pretty much, spin up your website, start gathering some clients. And from month one, it should be along the lines of, look, I have salaries of $5,000 to pay out and I can generate revenue of $7,000. So I need $2,000 to, I'm going to make $2,000 out of that. On the extreme other end, you've got things like social networks, which are basically like, I'm going to have to build this thing probably for years, investing into like, how do you build it? How do you get this thing going? And there's probably zero revenue coming out of that, because the first thing I just need to work out is like, how am I going to, build a network and get some engagement? And so that kind of looks like, you need to hire 100 people, be figuring out these problems, and only years later getting revenue. And so that looks like you need tons of cash up front.
Mm-hmm.
And marketplaces are not dissimilar to that. You kind of have to do a lot of work up front and get very little on day one. But if you get it working, then on the the scaling side of that, it's a great business model, because you don't have to keep scaling those costs. So with Airtasker, like I said, we were quite on that side of things. We had to raise money early on. I don't think it was just 1 year that it would have been a struggle. I think really what I have discovered, and I'm coining this as a thing, basically 3 months after you launch a product, you're basically running on adrenaline and you're like, hell yeah, everything that you're doing is awesome. Like, it's kind of like, if we move from like 50 email signups to 80 email signups, holy crap, that's like 60% growth. Sweet. Like, we're charging, right? And you kind of get these hits for like 3 months or so generally.
Yep.
Hey, we've launched a new version of the product. We've got the first email with a customer telling us they love what we're building, this kind of stuff, right? Then about 3 months, you kind of get into it and you're like, all right, to break even, I'd actually have to have like 1 million email signups. And like, I don't need one customer. I probably need about 50,000 to, break even or something on this thing. And I've seen like a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, it's like you just hit a wall. It's like, oh my gosh, like that just kind of hits you in one go. And that is the hard bit to get through, I think. It's from that kind of point of 3 months in to probably it's 2 years where you're kind of like, oh my God, we're still only getting like 80, 100 emails a day. We need 50,000. Holy crap, it's going to take ages. And so for us, that probably lasted 3 years, 4 years before we could kind of step back and go, oh, looks like we actually did create something. That's good. That probably continued on for a while. And I think that, even once you do build something which objectively has value in it, whether it's you IPO'd it or you exited it or you building good revenues or something, I think most founders probably always have that thing in the back of their head just going like, it's not good enough. Like
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done it yet. And I think that even, you talk to some of the most successful founders, whether, it's the guys from Atlassian or Canva or something like that, I'm pretty sure they're still in that position. They're not sitting back kind of going like, oh, awesome, look at what we built. We're so good. I think they're most likely sitting there going like, how are we going to go to the next level? Like, this is really, it's still terrifying. We have to get to the next level. Like, we are at $1 billion of revenue. How are we going to get to five? Because everyone's expecting us to do five. And the expectations just keep growing. So I don't think you ever get to a stage where like, I'm confident. I know exactly what I'm doing. All we've got to do now is sit back and watch it grow. It's always active.
And just to piggyback off that, something I've been harping on about in my previous episodes is the concept of a win and a learn. You either have a win, you don't have a loss. You've got to learn. What do you see as some of the biggest learning moments in those first couple of years where you'd had this realization? And was there any particular moment where you were like, "Damn, this might not work"?
So first of all, I think that when you talk about winning and learning, that ratio is probably along the lines of like 80% of things not working. And I think that's depending on what kind of industry that you're in. If you're really pioneering an industry, it's probably even higher than that, right? Like it's probably like most things you do will not work. Everything's an experiment. Give it a crack and hope. So for us, I think that ratio was fairly high. So there's a hell of a lot of learning that was done during that phase. If I have to think about it, I think one of the things that perhaps we could have learned earlier would have been learning how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is like learning how to reflect on, having the time to be able to like reflect on some of the decisions that you've made and like what made that decision good, what made it bad, and try to iterate on that. And I think that there is this thing that people talk about now, like decision journals, where it's kind of like, basically document, here's the information I have right now. Here's the decision I'm going to make off that. And then let's review whether that was a good idea, once that decision results, come through. And it's sometimes hard to like decouple that because sometimes really great results come from really crappy decisions. And
Yep.
sometimes really great decisions result in, crappy results as well. So it's I think if I had to reflect on it, the number one learning that I would have had over that period is get good at learning early on.
I like it. I like it. And so during those early stages, they say you get married to a startup and you don't really have any life outside of work. How were you managing the work-life balance? I suppose you would have been a little bit used to it because of Macquarie, but were you able to spend any time, watching motorsport or doing the things that you loved?
I think it's different for different kinds of people. So what I tend to be is I would describe myself on a daily basis as being like a sprinter, in that I like to have structure and sort of like sprint during that period and then pause. And so I'm along the lines of I would start work at around 8 or something, and I want to wrap up by 7 or 8 at night and do something else for a couple of hours and go to sleep and do it again. And so I like to create some boundaries, like having an office, I think is a great boundary to draw. I think having hours and sticking to those hours, even though no one's going to tell you to stick to those hours, I think, just having that in your head, I think are other good examples. So it's like compartmentalizing. That said, I'd say in the early years, yeah, it is pretty much close to 24/7 because even in that 2 or 3 hours that you have that you might have earmarked to yourself, you're still getting phone calls, emails, something's on fire, and you've just got to solve it. And that's kind of why I was saying, like, it's not necessarily something that you would necessarily want to do during uni, and like during a time where you can, hang out with friends and just be like, sort of like chill,
Mm-hmm.
because it's no matter how much you've got your stuff together, I think, it ain't chill for the first, at least the first year, but for me, probably even longer than that.
Airtasker lists on the ASX at the start of 2021. Tell me about the decision to list and what went into that process.
So in 2019, Airtasker decided that we really needed to prove out that we were a sustainable company. So in 2019, early part of that year, we were burning about $2 million a month, which I think is like, if you put it into the context of Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and these companies that are, burning through billions of dollars a year, it doesn't sound like that much money, $2 million a month. But as an individual founder, it's pretty full on. You're like, oh my gosh, like $2 million a month. That's like 70 grand a day. Actually, it's probably more like 100 grand a day. And you're like, oh geez, like that's full on. And so we decided that we were going to approve and not just say that we could become a profitable company, but actually go do it. So we spent the next, we actually had mapped out a plan. The plan was that it was going to take about 2 years to do that, which everyone was of various levels of excited about. But it turned out that it only took us about 7 months when we really put our minds to it to go from a $2 million burn rate to operating cash flow positive. And so that kind of took us into 2020. And then COVID hit, and boy, were we happy about the decision that we'd made, because we're like, oh my gosh, imagine if we were still burning truckloads of money. It's just going to be tough.
Yeah.
And it turned out, though, that COVID was actually quite an accelerant to our company in the macro perspective. So it was disruptive in that lockdowns themselves caused a depression in our marketplace. But actually what it ended up doing is demonstrating how flexible and adaptive our platform was, i.e. people could start requesting different kinds of services, taskers could connect with people and still be able to maintain an income during this challenging period. And so actually our long-term trajectory accelerated. And so at the end of the year, we're like, hey, we want to do this not just in Australia, but really double down into the US and to the UK where there's no one doing what we're doing. And so we assessed all the different ways that we could access capital in an agile way. And being public seemed like a really great way to be able to do that, because when you're public, it's much easier and faster to be able to raise capital, because effectively you've done all this hard work up front to tell, to go through, we're legit, we're audited, you can believe all of our numbers, we're transparent about the way we do things. And of course, investors have liquidity, and so easy in and easy out, which makes raising money a lot simpler. So that incentive, combined with the fact that we really wanted for our taskers and our employees to own part of Airtasker and be able to realize some value out of all the work that they'd put in the early years, that was the reason for going public. And so far, the ride has been really, really enjoyable and fun. And I think a lot of the, myths about going public, which go around in founder circles, are not. I don't think they're really 100% valid.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think about, companies like Canva and Safety Culture and all these big startup players in Australia. None of them have gone public. So was there any hesitancy from your point of view or anyone internally that maybe this wasn't the way to go?
No, actually, we had internally we had full alignment that this was an awesome direction to go. And look, I think that every company is completely different. I think if you look at something like Canva or Safety Culture, they're a large proportion of their customer base is actually in the US, which actually that's kind of more important than where is their office. And so in some sense, Canva and Safety Culture are US companies effectively. Yep. And I think that from that perspective, the methods with which you raise capital are completely different. So I think those companies, have these big US growth equity firms and stuff like that. I think if you're an Australian company, that's very, your funding options are completely different to that. So there are benefits in many ways because people love a local business, but there are also things that make it harder, such as not having access to some of those US growth equity funds. And so, different options and I think different course to go down.
And so IPO day, it would have been a pretty awesome occasion for you, a bit of a recognition of all your hard work and effort. Tell me about the emotions of that day, Tim.
Oh, look, I think, in some sense it's really interesting because as a founder, I think you're often looking at what's the impact that I'm delivering to users, to customers, to society. And so really doing the IPO is not it's not a massive milestone in some sense. It's like, okay, cool. Like some of our investors can like trade the shares, and like employees obviously are going to get a benefit out of this. It's fantastic, but it's another day in the office. And so my initial thought was like, oh, let's just treat it like another day. We'll go to the ASX, ring the bell, and then we'll go back to work and do our thing. But actually, my mum and my chairman and a bunch of other people kind of pulled me aside. They're like, hey, this is a big thing. If you're not going to smell the coffee on that day, then like, when are you going to ever do it? Like, what milestone does call for actually recognizing what you've done, and also what all the people who have come along the journey have also achieved. And so we did actually end up revising our position on that. We ended up like taking a day out of the office and then having a party at night, which is pretty off the rails, which is pretty cool. And I think that it was really important to recognize people's work and to not pass up life milestones like that. So it definitely did feel like a great achievement. I was really pleased with it.
Is that something that you learnt? Because you touched earlier on, you used the example of Canva. Those co-founders are always looking where's the next opportunity and don't really, as you said, smell the coffee. So was that something that you wanted to kind of change tack on and really celebrate those little wins?
Oh, look, I'm not sure. Like, I think Cliff and Mel know how to have a bit of fun, and I'm sure Luke does as well.
Yeah.
So I have no idea like how they have fun or they celebrate. But I do think it is important to celebrate, is what I would say, and it's a key part, not just for yourself, but also for the people around you, to create those moments. Because if you don't create those moments, then I think life is just going to pass you by. And sure, you might make a bunch of money and stuff like that, but that's not really what we're here to do. Like, everyone's here to have a positive impact on other people in the community and in society, and of course to enjoy their own lives as well. So I think you don't want to be too robotic about it. Pretty important to experience it.
And on that topic, just to wrap up, Tim, I'd love to ask you. So I mentioned earlier the win or the learn, and you've told me about the learn, but what is the biggest win? What do you see as a particular moment in your journey or in Airtasker's journey that you go, wow, that was really epic?
So there've been like so many like small things, and I'd say there hasn't been any kind of like silver bullet kind of win. But I think in terms of like impact and feeling like, we've really done something that's positive for the community, I think one of the stories that I would reflect on is one of our taskers actually told us that she was on Centrelink, like welfare, for about 20 years. And she spoke to us about how Airtasker actually helped her to be able to like break that inertia, because it was like smaller bite-sized chunks of work. And that actually helped her to like build up her confidence. And as she's built up her confidence and built up her income, she's actually now been able to be like working full time on Airtasker, and is actually completely out of that cycle of like, of welfare and having to report to Centrelink. And so I would say that like really in terms of wins, that's kind of like, that's the stuff that really goes like, oh, that's awesome. Like that's the dopamine hit. So yeah, I'd say I'd probably go for that one.
Nice one. All right, Tim Fung, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing all the backstory to Airtasker and the different ideas that were bubbling away in your head at the time. So thank you so much for taking the time, and really looking forward to continuing to watch Airtasker grow.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Finn.